Welcome to part 5 of the time tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to cover UV unwrapping, and that's where you take the surface of the object, you flatten it out into 2D space, and you send it to a 2D program like Photoshop, GIMP, Illustrator, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and begin. I'm going to jump to solid mode, and I'm going to rotate around to the back to pick something easy to start with. So we're going to start with this back piece, and I'm going to hold down Shift H on the keyboard, and that hides unselected. Otherwise you have to come down to Object, Show Hide, Hide Unselected. Okay, so we need to go into editing mode because we need to create seams. So let's go tab, that enters editing mode. Otherwise you have to come down here, click editing mode, hit A to deselect all. Again, select, deselect right here, and we need to create an edge loop. Now seams are where the object gets sliced to be able to flatten it out. So in other words, we want to separate this surface in here from this outer edge lip here from the front surface, so it can all lay out in 2D space. Now this will make more sense when we actually start doing this. So just follow along. Let's go ahead and go into edge mode and select, hold down Alt and click this edge here to do a loop selection to go all the way around. All right. Now if you don't have shortcut keys, all you need to do is select the edge, go down to select, loop. All right. Now there's a couple ways to mark a seam. One way is hit Control E on the keyboard, go down to mark seam. Or you can open up your tool panel, click the shading UVs, mark seam, or you can come down to mesh, edges, mark seam. All right, so there's 3 different ways to do this. Now let's go ahead, that's one edge. Let's get this other edge on this lip here. So I'm gonna hold down Alt and click to do another loop. Now I could, again, click mark seam here or in any of the other locations, or I can hit Shift R. Now Shift R is repeat last action, okay? So the action was creating a loop seam, and look, it created the loop seam. So I'm going to do the same thing to this inner edge here because it's pretty flattened out compared to the rest of this. So let me go ahead and click on it by holding down Alt. And actually, you know what? I'm going to try to do it without creating a seam here, to be honest. Let's see what happens when we just create these first 2 seams. That's it. Okay, so we have 2 seams, which means that this surface here is separated from this surface here, and it's separated from the front surface, or this backside surface, however you want to put it. Let's go ahead and open up a new window area. So I'm going to click and drag this to drag it over to create a new window. I'm going to hit T to hide the tool shelf in this window. I'm going to scroll down and choose UV Image Editor. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in here. Now with this object selected, I'm going to go into polygon mode. I'm going to hit A to select all, and I'm going to go U on the keyboard to go into UV mapping. Okay, now if you don't like shortcut keys, I believe you can go mesh, UV mapping. So we're going to use Unwrap because we created our own seams. Sorry, for a second there I forgot the name. So click Unwrap, and there you have it. Now the object has been torn apart into 2D space. So here's I'm not sure which one is which, so we'll find out. I'm going to hit A on the keyboard, select this. Okay, so the one on the left is the back side, and the one on the right is the front side. All right, so I'm going to hit A again to select all, so we can see them in here. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. It's not too terrible. I do want to space them apart a little bit more. And the big thing is you want to make sure these are as big as possible to fit in the space here. Because you're trying to paint textures on these. So the bigger area that you have, the more detail you can add. All right, so let's go ahead and select this guy. Now, first of all, I'm going to go to element mode. That allows me to select the entire connection. And let me drag it up. Probably to about there. Then I have to make a decision. Do I want to keep this the same size as the rest of these? Am I going to add that same type of detail level to this lip here? Probably not. So I'm going to go ahead and hit S on the keyboard to scale it down, and I'm going to move it. Now if you don't know shortcut keys, if you come down to UVs, transform, you have your grab, which is your translate, rotate, and size. All right, so that's all under the transform under UVs. So I'm going to select this guy again, and I'm going to move him. I'm going to position these 2 near the center. Whoops. So I'm going to have to hit G on the keyboard to move these at the same time. I'm going to S to scale them up. Something like that. And then I can reposition them a little bit more. All right, that looks good. Now let me just scale this guy back up. Move him. And scale him maybe a little bit more. Okay. And again, it's because I want to focus on these two having more detail than this side here. In fact, the reality is this is going to have the most detail at the back, even though we're never going to see it in the animation. But just in case, if I decide to spin the pocket watch or something, it gives me a lot of area to work with. Now, let's test to see what this looks like. First of all, I actually want to rotate each one of these pieces to where this little bump is on the top. So I'm going to select this, hit R on the keyboard to rotate it. So that's good. And this one as well, there's bumps way down here. So let me rotate it. That's probably good. And select this one, rotate. There we go. All right, so that's looking good. Let's go ahead and test it now. So we're going to create a new file in here so we can see an image on our object. To do so, we're going to click New, and I'll just call it Back UV and test. Okay. Now 1024 by 1024 is probably fine. The bigger the image size, the more detail you can put in the scene. Do I want to make it bigger? No, I think I'll stick with the 1024 by 1024 now. So I'm going to click here where it says blank, and I'm going to do colored image. Now before I continue, if you're working for a game model, 1024 by 1024 is probably good. If it's a really small model, you can drop down the size. You want to try to keep it to multiples of 2. So if you start at 2, then you go 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 212, or no, what is it? 256, 512, 1024, 2048, and 4096. And I'm not really sure what's above 4096, but 4096 is 4K. That's massive. And again, if you're not really good at math, all you need to do is times, let's say 1024 by 2, and it will give you the 2048 the next step up, or divide it by 2 and it'll give you the 512 next step down. So anyway, for right now, test purposes, I think 1024 will work. For videos and animations, I'll probably bring this up to 2048 to give me lots of detail area. But in this case, 1024 should be good. Sorry. Let me go ahead and click OK. And this is the map that it generates. So that's pretty cool. Now to see it in this viewport, what we need to do is open up the Properties panel. I'm going to hit T to hide the Tool panel. And I'm going to open up Shading and Texture Solid. And that gives me the ability to see the texture on the actual object. So what I'm looking for is to see if there's any squashing and stretching. So are the bricks the same size all the way through it? And is the text the same size? And it looks like it's pretty even all the way across. There might be a little bit of stretching going on over here and down here on the edges, but it's pretty good. I think that's going to work. Okay. And I didn't have to really cut this edge way out here, it looks like. That matched up perfectly. Now you can see where we created seams, the textures don't line up. And that's why it's very important that you put seams where people aren't going to notice the unmatching texture, because that's very difficult to match that up into a 2D program like Photoshop. So that looks good. And to save this to where we can send it to a 2D program, what you're going to do is you're going to come down to UVs, Export UV Layout. Okay. And you're going to go over to, let's see here, Tutorials, 3D Desk. Nope, not Desk. Time. 3D Texture. So I'm going to call this, I could create a folder for this. Probably be a good idea if I did. So let me create a folder. And this folder, did it create a folder? Texture. Didn't seem to create a folder. Let me hit cancel. Go into the folder itself. So work 2, trap CG, tutorials, time, 3D, texture. Let me manually create a folder. We'll call this UV temps. Okay. And that's where I'm going to save this file to. So UVs, export UV layout, texture, UV temps. And we'll call this back UV temp. Because again, it's just a temporary file that eventually I'll put it into Photoshop or GIMP or whatever program. So down here is where you can save what kind of file type. It's saving as a PNG. You can also do an SVG or an EPS, which are vector files, which is pretty cool. And then size here. Now, because this back is never really going to be seen by the viewer, I'm going to leave it at 1024 by 1024. Now, fill opacity is how much the object itself gets filled, and you'll see that here in a sec. So I'm going to just say 0.4. You can choose any value. You can even say 1 if you want. All right, I think that works. And of course, I can check all UVs, but I only have one UV, so I'm good. So I'm going to go ahead and export. And it exported the UV layout. So let's go ahead and minimize this. I don't need it anymore. So that piece is done. I'm going to hit Tab to come out of edit mode. So I'll go back into object mode here. And I'm going to hit Alt-H to unhide all. So the back side is done. So let's continue on. Let's do a few pieces before we go into another program. And I let you guys go on your own. So let's do the crossbar here. I'm going to do Shift-H. Otherwise, go to Object, View, etc., etc. And this object has a modifier applied. So let's go ahead and actually apply it so it's one solid object. All right. And there's one more thing I want to do. I don't like these hard edges that are here. So I'm going to go into Tab, Edge mode, or Edit mode, go to Edge, and select this edge. Hold down Shift and Alt, click on this edge. Again, I'm doing loop selections. Shift allows me to add multiple selections. So I have those two sections ready, and now I can go to Control E on the keyboard, and I can do bevel right here, which is Control B. Now you can also go Mesh, Edges, Bevel, Control B, and let's get it to something like that. It's a little bit better. I just really didn't like the hard edge. Okay, so now that we've fixed up the geometry, I know for a fact that the blue is facing toward the front, all right, the blue arrow. Just to make sure, let me go Alt-H. Oh, let me come out of edit mode first. Alt-H, and you can see here that the blue arrow is facing forward. All right, so I'm going to go Shift-H again, Tab, and what I'm going to do is create a seam on the back side where the viewer won't see it. So let's go ahead and go into edge mode, which we are, and Alt-click this edge right here. All right, so it's looping again. And let's go ahead and mark the seam. So you know how to do it. Control E, mark seam. And let me go ahead and tear these off as well. And I'm going to do the Shift R to repeat the last action, which is really cool. Shift R, and I'm done making my seams for this object. So let's go ahead and go to polygon mode, A on the keyboard to select all. Let's open up that window again. Now this is where having two monitors really helps, so you don't have to keep opening and closing this window. I'm going to hit T and N to hide the properties, and we'll switch this view to UV editor. And I'm going to come in here, hit U, unwrap, and there we have it. Now let's go ahead and add an image. This is fine. Test crossbar. Okay, 1024 by 1024. You can try UV grid if you don't want to try the color grid this time. I'm going to stick with the color grid. All right, so that looks pretty good. It's unwrapping fairly nicely. Now, if it didn't, maybe there's some issues. Maybe I'm starting to see some squashing or stretching. I mean, the C is a little distorted here, but it's not too terrible. There's a way to kind of help clean that up, and that is with, let's go ahead and select it in here. So I'm going to deselect everything except for this section here, and I'm going to go to UVs, and we're going to go minimize stretch. Okay, now down here at the bottom you can see that it says 0. Now it also says press plus and or minus, or scroll the wheel to set the value. So if I scroll the wheel up, you can see it's changing the squash or the stretch. So down to 0, you can see in my left window that the C6 is very squished. And if I scroll the mouse up, now it's not squished. So I have to decide where in here I think is going to be best. And it looks like 1% is going to be the best for it. So I'm going to go ahead and click, and it sets it. All right. So that's pretty cool. That's how you can clean that mesh up. Let me go ahead and move these around a little bit more so they're not, oops. I'm going to hit G on the keyboard and X just to move it on the X axis. There we go. I'm going to select them both, hit G and move them up a little bit. Okay, so now I can actually export this. UVs, export UV layout. And we're going to go into tutorials, time, 3D, texture, UV temps, and this was crossbar. UV, oops. So crossbar UV temp. Now, because this is a main object in the scene, I might want to increase the size for the export, but it's fairly small. So I think 1024 by 1024 is going to be more than enough space to add detail. So let me go ahead and just click export. All right, that's done. Let's go ahead and come out of edit mode. You just drag this over. I'm going to hit N to hide the properties, Tab to come out of edit mode, and Alt H to unhide all. Okay, so that's two surfaces done. Let's do this ring here. So this right now is a spline. Let me go Shift H to hide unselected. And as you can see here, not only does it have a mirror modifier on it, but it's also still a spline. So I need to convert it. Now, if you come down to Object, oh my gosh, sorry. Object, go all the way up to Convert, and you can do Mesh from Curved Surfaces here. So that's going to convert the object, which is also Alt-C, okay? Now, it also collapses the modifier stack that I had, and it's done, all right? So let's go ahead and start playing with this. Let's go into Edit Mode, Tab. It is a mesh now, so I can do this. I'm going to go into edge mode, and first I'm going to select this edge down here because it's not visible by the camera, it's hiding inside. So I'm going to select it, and I will go ahead and go Control E, mark seam. All right, so that's ready to go. And let's do the backside. So the backside is going to be back here because you can see the blue arrow which direction it's facing. So I'm going to do this edge back here, and then let's do Control E, mark seam. Okay, so we have our two seams, split it here, one in the back. Let's go ahead and go to polygon mode, select all, U on the keyboard, unwrap. And there we have it. And we're seeing it. Let me go ahead and hit A to deselect all. And it doesn't look like things are really stretching. You can see here the seam problem. That's why we put it on the back. All right, so let me see if I can play with, let me go A to select all. And I'm going to separate these a little bit more. So I'm going to select this one, hit G and Y, just to slide it up a little bit. Okay, so in this case, let's make sure that these two are minimize stretch. So 1 looks like this, 2 looks like this. I think 2 actually looks better in this case. Or sorry, 0. Yeah, 0 looks better. So I'm going to go with 0. Okay, so I'm going to click. That's looking good. So we're done with that. So I'm going to go ahead and save this out, UVs, export UV layout, and texture, UV temps. And this one's going to be called, I think this is handle. Actually, I'm just going to call it H because I don't remember if I called it handle or hook or what. So I'm going to say H UV temp. Okay, so that's done. Let's go ahead and go tab to come out of edit mode, and let's jump back into Alt H to unhide all. So let's do something a little bit more complicated. Let's try this front face here. Let's go Shift H. Now, there's one thing I need to look at first before I unwrap this guy, and that is there's an issue I know inside this geometry piece right here. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into edit mode, tab, and I'm also going to go into wireframe mode, which is also Z on the keyboard. And what you can see here, let me go to edge mode, is that there are these two edges right on top of each other almost, and that's not good. Okay, and what it looks like is this edge is on the inside and it needs to be pushed out. So I'm going to Alt click it so it loops all the way around, and I'm going to hit S on the keyboard to scale it, and I'm going to scale it up to maybe right about there. Now let's hit Z on the keyboard to come out of wireframe mode, and that looks perfect. Maybe even hit scale a little bit more to scale it up, right about there. So if I grab this edge now, and let's just move it to make sure. Yeah, I've got no weird geometry hidden within geometry. Okay, so it's just something to pay attention to, paying close attention to, and that was caused by the solidify modifier that we added, by the way. So let's start tearing this thing apart. So while we're here, let's just go Alt click and do Control E, mark seam. Alt click, I'm going to do Shift R, mark seam, Shift R. Again, Shift R is just repeat the last action. Shift R, Shift R. So I got the lips there. Let me come to this one. Do I need to do this one on the inside? Probably not, actually. This one definitely, because of the degree angle at which these two are separated. Now, because these faces are facing exactly in a perfect circle and not flat like these on the top, I need to create a seam on these right here. So I'm going to go, just ideal to maybe choose this top edge right here. This one right here. Ugh. Click, okay. And we're going to mark that one. So Control C or Control E, mark seam. It's very important that I mark that seam because it allows this to flatten out. So it tears it apart. You should already got a good idea of what's going to happen. And I might have to do this edge here, we'll see. Definitely need to do this edge. So Shift or Control E, mark seam. Now, that's another scenario. All these polygons are facing each other, so we need to add a seam probably right around here. So Control E, mark seam. All right, so it looks like I have all the seams now for this guy. So let's go ahead and go into polygon mode. A on the keyboard to select all. U, unwrap. And you can see here those two that we actually separated by adding the mark seam. Look at that, they're nice and flat. All right, so I'm going to grab both. Well, I'm going to grab the first one, drag it up, and the second one, drag it up. And what I'm going to do is select both and scale them down. They're a little too big for my taste because they're right on the edges. So let me move this all the way up to the top. Move this one right below it. Okay, so that gives me more space to scale these. Let me grab these guys and move them off to the side for right now. And these are where it's really important. Now let's figure out which one is which. This one is the front and this one should be the inside. Yep. Does it look like I've got any weird stretching going on? Well, we can play with the stretching here in a sec. So let me select both these, put them near the center, and then you scale them up. Very important that I have lots of space to work with these. Grab to move them a little bit, scale to move them up a little bit more. Let me move them closer. Okay, and scale. I'm going to hold down Shift to slowly scale it up. Try something like that, and I'm going to move this one a little bit more over. And again, I'm trying to stay inside the box. Move this one down. All right, so they're not overlapping. The big thing is nothing can be overlapping. Now I can grab this guy. This one looks like it's this inside loop here. Definitely don't care how big that is. So I'm just going to slam it here in the center. And this one is the inside loop in here. So let me move that to about here. And I'm going to start rotating everything to where they're facing up. Let's see, where's the dip in this one? Right there. And do the same thing for this piece. Where's the dip in this one? Right there. And this shouldn't even have a dip. Okay, that's looking good. Yeah, that's supposed to be that edge, and this one's this one. Okay, so that's looking good. Let's go ahead and select all again. I'm going to select this group, and I'm going to just try seeing what happens when I do minimize stretch. Oh, and it makes a mess of the geometry. So that's 0%. That's 100. 1%. Yeah, let's go 1%, gives me a much cleaner outlook. So I'm good with that. Okay. So everything's looking good, cleaned up. I'm not getting any weird distortions. A little bit on the edge because it's a hard angle right there, but I'd rather not put a seam there just because it might be super visible. Remember, seams you want to keep as few as possible. Okay, so that looks good. Let's go ahead and export it. This one I'm going to export as something completely different. I'm going to export it as, let's go texture UV templates. Not completely different. I'm going to export it as a different size. I need a lot of texture space for this so I can add lots of detail since this is the front. So 4096 would be a good number, or 2048. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to do 2048. The fact that I'm recording on this computer, 2048 by 2048, and everything else is fine. Again, that's a multiple of 1024. If you're not good at math, just do 1024 times 2, and it'll give you the number 2048. We're going to call this front UV temp, and click export UV layout. Okay, so let's go ahead and come out of edit mode, back into object. Because I didn't keep closing this window, it allowed me to keep this texture in place to see it on all these components. So let me go ahead and hit Alt H, and I think I will let you guys unwrap the rest. It's pretty self-explanatory for each piece. There isn't anything that I haven't done that you guys would need to do. This piece I would unwrap the full top, put the cut down the back. Same thing with the center one, and same thing with this top one. I would cut it at the top, cut it at the bottom, and slice it along the back. So you guys should be able to handle all that. Same thing with the sprockets. Let me select this, hit H. The gears, I would make sure at least I have the full face by itself, and then how you unwrap the inside edges, probably just flatten them out, put a seam maybe in a corner, flatten those out, but it's more, the detail is going to lie on the faces on all these gears. So let me go ahead and Alt H, and let's save this. Now we're going to go as File, Save As, and we're going to save as Blend 3 or Time 3. So we don't mess with the original, because the original one has its own procedural textures, and maybe we want to keep that for whatever reason. So let's go ahead and click Save Blender File. Let's go ahead and open up Photoshop. Now you can use any program. I'm just using Photoshop as an example for right now. You can see here I have the Layers panel open. If you don't see it, just click here, or you have to go Windows Layers, because you are going to want to see this. So let's bring in one of our images. I'm going to start with the front, just because that's going to require most of the detail. So this piece here, and I'm going to drag and drop it. Okay, so you can see here, here's our texture. I can call this first layer UV, because that's what it was, the UV template. And let's go ahead and start looking at stuff that we can bring in. So my suggestion is get reference material, old pocket watches, take a look at what's going on. I like this pattern stuff, so I think I'm going to make some pattern stuff on the outside, but the overall color or diffuse map, which is going to be the color texture, I'm going to make, I think, brass. That's what I'm seeing here is a lot of brass. So let's try that. Let's go ahead, and I typed in old brass texture. Let's go to images. Now my suggestion is you're going to want to find the biggest images you can. Now I kind of like this, even though it's a really small image. You can see that the brass kind of fades into almost a green tone when it gets too old. But let's go search tools, switch this to large. And that's pretty good. Okay, that's kind of nice. It's really just trying to pick which tone and color you want. This one's kind of cool because it's already got like this ring pattern that we might be able to do the edging. So let me play with this one actually. Click on it. Yeah, I think that's going to be cool. And I think I screwed up where I can get it. Let me go view image. There we go. So I'm going to right click and say copy image. Come to here, Control V. All right, and this area here was the front side, so that's the area I'm going to focus on first. Let's go ahead and hit Control T, which just real quick is edit, transform, or right here, free transform. Okay, that's Control T. I'm going to scale this up. In fact, actually, let's put this below, drag and drop it below the layer so I can see it. Now remember that alpha channel that we set on the texture for the export out of Blender at, what was it, 0.4? That's what we're seeing here. If I wanted to, I can change the mode to soft light to not be so distracting when I'm trying to texture, but still be there to where I can see it. So let me go ahead and let me lock this layer so I don't accidentally select it. I have auto select on, allowing me to select layers within the viewport instead of clicking them over here. And let's grab this, Control T. Let's bring it up. So I'm looking to take that dark circle, kind of match it to, let me hit enter real quick. Oops. Hit Control T again. All right, so maybe something like that. Looks like I might have to stretch it a little bit. Stretch it. The whole idea is to get that ring pattern right on the outside edge to give me that rough look on the outside. So that's pretty cool. Let me go ahead and hit enter. I'm going to double click the zoom icon. Okay, this is a fairly low texture, so it's starting to pixelate a little bit, but that's okay. For this demo, that should be fine. I am going to hit image, adjust. Let's do levels, just to tighten it up a bit. Yeah, something like that. Okay, so I'm going to call this layer Diffuse. All right, and I need to, let's duplicate it, Command J. And let's see, I'm going to hide the top one for now. Let me go ahead and create a folder and drag both these into the folder. It's going to be Diffuse. Okay, so this first one, I want to make sure it's not covering another object. So I'm going to turn on, this is a mapping mode, and it uses black and white to hide things. So black is the hide. So I'm going to go to my paintbrush over here. I'm going to paint out what is on top of other geometry. Okay, and let me switch my brush mode to something harder. Minimize, minimize, brush. There we go. And blow this up. Again, I'm just trying to make sure it's not on top of the other geometry. So that's good. And let's go back to layers, unhide this one. We're going to take this one and move it over. So maybe not too worried on the inside. Maybe I want to get some grunge on the inside or something. I don't know. You can keep playing and morphing. Maybe I can grab sections of this grunge and apply it to elements of the pocket watch. I'll probably actually do that on the outside too. So let's say there, let's go ahead and add a mask as well. And the reason why I add mask instead of erase is that way it's non-destructive. I don't destroy any of the images that I have. Okay. So that's looking good. Let's go ahead and I'm going to duplicate it up again. Oops, Control J. Or if you don't want to use Control J, just drag and drop it to this icon here. I'm going to delete the mask. Delete. So this one I'm going to use as a way of adding some grunge to the outside of this circle. So I'm going to hit Control T, rotate this around. Maybe something like, maybe I'll have this coming from the top. Yeah. Something like that. All right. And what I'm going to do again is apply a mask and erase a bunch of this because I don't want to cover the nice ring that I created. All right, so let me switch this back to unlock it, normal, so I can really see what's going on. Let me relock it. Okay, so with this selected, let me zoom in here. Go back to the mask, my paintbrush, and I'll probably use a soft edge now to blend it. Now I'm using curly brackets to scale my brush. Otherwise you have to come up here, scale it using this if you don't have shortcut keys. So let me just blend this in. Something like that. Okay. So I can keep going around and adding rough areas like that. I think I'm going to focus on that for right now. In fact, actually, let's do one more. Layers. Let me duplicate this guy again, drag and drop. Oops, not to the trash can. To the copy, let me trash the mask. I can call this front ring, because that's what I used it for. This one is inside. This one was grunge. Grunge 1, so I'm going to say GR1, and this one's going to be GR2. All right, so GR2, I'm going to drag, maybe use this corner area, something like that, because this is the area I'm going to destroy, so I'm going to add some of this broken up rust area. Okay, and again, I'm going to apply the mask. Use my black. Let me blow up my brush so I can quickly erase what I don't want. And then I'm going to come in here with a smaller brush and just blend it. Now remember, I'm only concerned about what's over the geometry. Okay, so that's looking good. I don't have to worry about any of this stuff out here because it's not part of my geometry. If I wanted to, I could probably go to, let's say, this one. Actually, I'll go to this one and hit X on the keyboard to flip the black and white, or you can just click these arrows here. And I'll just paint in real quick that area just to be on the safe side. Okay, there we have it. Let's go ahead and save this as a Photoshop file first. File, save as. And we're going to save this into the textures folder. And usually I create a Photoshop file for just the Photoshop documents or whatever program you're using. So I'm going to go new folder and I'll call these edit textures, just in case I'm not using Photoshop. Edit textures, and we're going to call this front UV texture, or actually front texture. There we go, and click save. Let's see, click OK. So that's the Photoshop file. We need to save out a PNG, JPEG, Targa. If you're going to use a game engine, find out which game engine, which texture they prefer. Otherwise, if you're doing a video, PNG is fine. So I'm going to go ahead and go File, Save As. And I'm going to save this as a PNG. And I'm actually going to save it to the main texture area. So this is going to be front diffuse. Okay. And I'm going to just call it front diff, DIFF for short. Start speeding up my naming process. So front diff, I'm going to click save and click OK. All right. Now for my bump map, I need a black and white image. And I think maybe let's just duplicate diffuse. So I'm going to drag the whole folder, call this bump. And I'm going to select everything in it and hit Control E, or you can come up to this little icon right here, say merge layers. So it merges this one image. And if you go image, adjust, desaturate, which is Shift Control U, switches it to black and white. And let me go Alt L, which is image, adjust, levels. Let me tighten this up a bit. Kind of flattening out some of the color because I don't want too much bump. Okay, maybe something like that. Click OK. And that's probably good. And I might even use this as a specular control. We'll see. Let's go File, Save As, PNG, and we'll save it to the main texture area. This is going to be front bump. So front diffuse, front bump, click Save, click OK. And actually, sorry, I need to hide the UV map, otherwise it's going to show up. So File, Save As. Oh, it's still saving. File, Save As. Go up one. PNG. Bump. And I have to do that same thing with diffuse. File, Save As. Oh, it's still saving. Save As. PNG. Diffuse. I don't need the wireframe on top of my image. Okay, so that's done. And then I'll just save the Photoshop file. I like saving Photoshop files, that way I can go back and tweak things. And let's go ahead and minimize this and jump into Blender. Okay, so to bring that in, first of all, I'm going to delete this map here. I don't need it. And some of these I might have to delete individually. So I'm just going to tab, go into it, tab out, tab, hit the X button right here, deletes the texture that we're using as a reference for the surfaces. So let's just tab, go into this one, tab, delete, tab, tab. Again, tab goes in and out of edit mode. All right, again, that's not deleting the unwrap, that's just deleting the reference texture we were using. So I'm going to select this first piece and go over to material. Remember, it still has material from when we played with it earlier with procedural textures. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to go new. I'm going to call this face metal. Okay. I'm going to jump over to the texture palette. And right here, I'm going to go new. And I'm going to find, I can call this face diffused. And it's already saying let's find a movie or image. So let me minimize these because I don't like the way it's set the layout. So I'm going to put the image, oops, we have to grab it by this tab, below color. I'm going to put image sampling below image. And I'll put image mapping below mapping. Okay, so I'm going to start with the image tab, open, textures, and we know it's going to be front diffuse, open. And if I scroll down to influence, it's set to the diffuse section. That's good. So let's see what this does by going into rendering mode. Let me just minimize this. We don't need it right now. Rendering. So now there's my texture being projected onto the surface of the watch. And this is how I can control where the rust is going to be at. I can add the scratches manually by adding it to the bump map. So let's add the bump map for right now. So let's click here and do, let's see, new. Do I want new? Yeah, new. Let's go ahead and switch it to bump and not color. There we go. And click open. Texture, bump, open. All right. So you can see here now it's created the bump from that image that we set up. So that's pretty cool. That's how you control each element. So diffuse, I can probably go back and say, you know what, let me see what happens when I have it controlling. Ooh, this is really slowing down the system. If, let's say I wanted to control specular intensity and color. So now the color and intensity of specular is being affected. All right, let's turn off intensity, see what that does. How much more? This is really laggy because it's a fairly large texture and my system's pretty old. So you can see here, changing which one it affects gives me a different outcome on each section. So I would really need to play with influence. I would need to play with a lot of things to get this to look right. But that's basically a start point of how you can actually get your textures now mapped onto your object. And you can see here when I was texturing it. In fact, let me switch over to solid because this is just killing me. Solid. Okay, and let's open this up. Let's change this back to UV editor and let's go open. Let's see, tutorials, time, 3D, texture, diffuse. All right. And whoops, actually I need to delete that, sorry. Let me go select it, tab. Now I'm going to open textures, diffuse. All right, so now we're seeing it in this window without having to try rendering it. So you can see here, the rust that I put at the top is there, and the rust that I added to the lower left-hand corner is there. So that's pretty cool, and that's how you can really go through and affect your object. And I mean, there's so many different ways to do this. Let's say I go back to diffuse. Let's go back to the Google. Oops. Let's see, copper. Or no, we were using brass. Brass texture, image. Copper might actually be a good one too. So maybe I want a clean one more than I had. And I'll use bump to control the actual displacement view image. All right, let's try this. Copy image. So come back in here. I'm going to hit Control V. And let me hit Control T because this looks like a very large image. So maybe we can scale it down. Yeah, not too much. All right. So for just sake, I'm just going to leave it as is. And of course, I would actually go through and probably set this up correctly on each surface and so on and so forth. But I'm running out of time, and this should be pretty self-explanatory how to continue from now on. But let's say I've got this nice smooth brass texture now, but under bump, I'm going to go ahead and do maybe a pattern. Remember, I'm looking at some of these watches. They have these cool designs. Well, instead of trying to model that, I can actually texture that. So let me show you an example. Let me create a new file. We're going to have to do this with a new file. So I'm going to say this one is going to be 800 by 800, an even square. Trust me, you're going to want to use a square. And again, my purpose is to create a texture that comes around here, a bump texture. It creates a pattern. So let's just create something funky. Let me maybe do, I'm using the pen tool to create it. Something like this that I'm going to repeat around and around and around. Okay, so here's my pattern. First of all, I need to find the center point of my scene. So I'm going to go to Window, actually View, and make sure that my snap is on and my rulers are on. Then with your rulers activated, what you're going to do is you're going to right click and set these to %. None of the others, just %. That's going to give me a percentage of where I'm in the scene. Okay, so check it %, and what you're going to do is you're going to click and drag from one of the rulers. It creates what they call a marker line. Actually, there's another word for it. Anyway, you can see here just above my mouse I have a percentage, so I know that's 50%. Let me click and drag from the top down 50%. There we go. So now I know exactly where my center point is, and that's very crucial for this. So what I'm about to do is duplicate around a circle, but it's not going to work with a shape object. So I'm going to have to rasterize this. And so before I do, let me duplicate it because I might have to tweak this design. So let me create a copy, and this copy I will hide for now. Okay, so here's my original. I'm going to right click on it, say rasterize layer, and I'm going to use, you have edit transform or free transform, which is Control T, but we're going to go Alt Control T on the keyboard. And this is very important you do it this way because this is going to create a duplicate of the object as well as transforming its position. So I'm going to take this little center point and I'm going to bring it down to where it's locked into place at 50-50 right there. So 50-50. And I'm going to click and drag this on the corner here. So something like let's say there. Let's go a little bit more. Okay, so that's a degree of 5. All right. And you can see here it created a duplicate. I'm going to hit enter. Now to repeat that, so it goes all the way around, I'm going to hold down Alt, Control, Shift, and T. And you can see here, I keep holding down Alt, Control, Shift, T. I'm just keep hitting T. And it's repeating this. Okay, so it's almost spot on. 5 degrees was not enough. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that last one. It's a bummer that it wasn't enough, but I would have to go back and tweak exactly what angle I need to be at. Probably 6 or 7 degrees from what it's looking at, or maybe 6 degrees. So anyway, moving forward, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the very top one, not the copy because I still need that just in case. Select the very bottom one, and you're going to click on this arrow here and merge layers. So it's going to merge what was selected. And I'm going to drag this over to my other file. I'm going to click and drag and put it in here. And I need to put it on top of, there it is. I just had to unhide the bump. Okay, so the bump map is, let me hide that for now. So the bump works off of a black and white image. Black is low, white is high. So right now I've created the low elements. Let me scale this to fit into this circle area. And as you can see here, it is way too big. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it for right now. Let's do something like that. I'm going to create a layer below it, and this is going to be the white layer. All right, and I'm going to hide everything else. So that's my bump. I'm going to go ahead and go File, Save As. Let's go to PNG. I'm going to save it to the texture folder as front bump. Save. Yes. Click OK. And I'm also going to save my diffuse. File, Save As. PNG, Texture, Diffuse. Save As. So I'm saving directly on top of the old ones. And let me come back to here. So I need to reload. Let me just hit T on the keyboard. Oh, actually, Tab on the keyboard. So we're in edit mode. Let me drag this over and switch this to UV image editor. Am I on the wrong one? There we go. Tab. Okay, let's go ahead and delete this one. Go open. Tutorials, time, 3D, texture. We're going to use diffuse. All right, so that's the way this looks now. And let's go ahead and go to rendering mode. Actually, let's go to material mode since we have it selected. Let's go to textures. The diffuse, I'm going to reload just by clicking these arrows here. So that reloads the new diffuse. And let me reload the bump. And let's go ahead and test this. Let's go to rendering. And voila, now I have the pattern that I created. And the bump has changed it. Of course, you can create any pattern you want. And let me see if I dive down here. I can switch this to increasing the intensity. And it looks even more extreme with the pattern. So that's really cool. And it looks like I modeled a lot of work and I really didn't. It's all textured. Now, some people say, well, normal maps work better than bumps when you're doing something like this. Okay, that is very true. So let me go ahead and play with that idea. So let me minimize this and we're going to go back to the web. Let's create a new tab and we're going to call Free Normal Map Generator. So this right here, Free Normal Map Generator. First link that comes up is an online normal map generator. Now I use one that I actually bought on my computer, but because it's not free, I'm going to talk about this one. So this is really cool. I can go get an image, and just to show you how awesome this is what normal maps are capable of doing. All right, now if I increase the displacement, you can actually see it's physically displacing the geometry. Now normal maps take the black and white bump map and convert it into a normal map, which is, it uses multicolors to indicate different directions of light, and then gives you a final result of something like this. So let me come up and go select image and choose this one. Click open. And it's just got to think. There we go. So now you can see here it's creating the normal map for it. And I can choose displacement, ambient occlusion, specular. I can create any of these maps. I can play with the settings for it. You can see here, here's the end result. So it's really messy in this case, and that's because I have displacement way up. Okay, so let's try that. Let's go ahead and click download. All right, so it downloaded. It's going to be in my downloads folder. So let me go ahead and go to downloads, select it, Control X to cut it, go back, and I'm going to paste it into my textures folder. This time I'm going to call it, it is a normal map, so we're going to call it front norm. Okay. Now I can go back to Blender, and this time I'm going to choose the normal map, front norm, accept. Okay. So now I'm using the normal map, but I need to change a few things so it knows that it's using a normal map. So we're going to go into image sampling, and right here where it says normal, we're going to check that. And voila. Now you can see it's too drastic because I have the settings way too high here. So let me say 1. You can really see that it's deformed this object. I'm just going to let it sit and render out a little bit more. It's probably too much, but this is how you actually play with it. Tangent space, I can do object. That looks a bit better. It's kind of interesting. What did tangent look like? Yeah, it's interesting, the two different forms. Object, I'm going to go back to the amount. I'm going to say 0.5 because it's just too high. All right. So you can see here the end result is something slightly different, but definitely looks super interesting. And that's using normal maps. And again, because the normal map understands, or Blender understands through the normal map that it is a normal map, it creates a different look than the bump. All right, so you get to choose. I'm trying to show you how to do both. Now displacement, we could check displacement, but there's not enough geometry here to really displace it. We would have to really up the geometry level to create a good displacement map for this. Otherwise it's just gonna look terrible. So I'm gonna uncheck that. And displacement actually physically morphs the geometry. And I think you might have to add a displacement modifier. Nope, not in this program. Some of the programs actually require both the map and the displacement modifier to be activated. Nope, there is a displace right here. And it's going to ask me to get it from a texture. So you can add it as a modifier as well. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this series of the time tutorial. You can go through and continue to map or unwrap your objects and of course texture them using whatever program you're going to use and whatever style of texture map. So you can create your bump maps separately. You can have multiple bump maps. Remember, we can have as many textures imported into Blender as we want. And we can really rack this thing up. Like, and I can have a bump map that's the rustic look, and then of course a bump map controlling a pattern. So there's just tons and tons of options. And unfortunately, we just don't have enough time in this tutorial series to go through them all, but I wanted to give you guys an idea of how this works. So go ahead and join me for part 6. 6, we're going to start ripping things apart. And I'll probably stick with the procedural generated textures for the object instead of doing the the unwrapping. But for those of you who really want to go through and add some beautiful detail and make this watch just look amazing, my suggestion is use the unwrap options. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll catch you guys for part 6.